Good evening, Program Director, esteemed dignitaries present today, President of the South African Sheriff's Society, Ms. Petro Roet, and your executive, Deputy Chairperson of the South African Board for Sheriffs, Mrs. Amanda Titus, who is representing me today, members of SASS, and guests, I greet you all. It is a singular privilege and honor for me to address this auspicious occasion, in particular, the annual general meeting of SASS ahead of the election of its new leadership. It is unfortunate that I could not attend this occasion in person due to the sudden change of diary which required my urgent attention. However, I've still deemed it fit that I do not miss this opportunity to address you today on the issues of mutual concern to the voluntary associations, in particular SASS and SANAPS, and the South African Board for Sheriffs as a professional regulatory body of the sheriff's profession. Today marks exactly 9 months and 7 days since the new board was appointed into office by the Honorable Minister Ronald Lamola. And it gives me a great pleasure today to address you on the challenges we've faced thus far and the strides that we have made as a new board in this short space of time. The challenges that we have encountered upon taking office were, amongst others, a substantial outcry from members of the profession, individually, in some instances, and collectively, through other associations, on the appointments process for acting and permanent sheriffs. Another challenge we encountered was the inaccurate and, in some instances, under-declarations of the gross turnover figures by sheriffs in respect of their legal obligations, phase 1. Another challenge we encountered was the substantial and alarming number of part-heard disciplinary cases which were pending against sheriffs for a very long time before the board. Also, another challenge we encountered was the fact that the organization as it stood was inaccessible to members of the public and sheriffs who were spread out across the different parts of our country. By way of example, many of these members of the public who found themselves scattered across the country wanting access to the physical offices of the board had to travel lengths and breadths of kilometers from their destinations to the Western Cape to get access to the headquarters of the board. And lastly, one of the other challenges, amongst the many others that we encountered, was the inadequate standard operating procedures we inherited in respect of crucial matters undertaken by the board in respect of its core functions as envisaged in the Act. Ladies and gentlemen, I can go on and on about the many challenges that we have encountered thus far. But one thing I can assure you of is that we are still in the process of resolving same efficiently and effectively. How this will be done will require a full day of its own for me to enlighten those interested on how all these challenges will be overcome. Our board strategy plan report comprehensively deals with the manner in which we plan to resolve some of the challenges that we encountered and some of those that we assessed early into our term of office. With that said, I must re-clarify the role of the South African Board for Sheriffs. In my view, there is a difference between a professional body and a professional regulatory body. The former would be that akin to SASS and SANAPS, and the latter would be that which is the South African Board for Sheriffs, a regulatory body established in terms of the Sheriffs Act 90 of 1986. The role of a professional association or body, voluntary body, would be to advance and protect the interests of its members, whereas the role and function of a professional regulatory body established in terms of an act of parliament such as ours would be to monitor and regulate the standards of an ethical code of sheriffs who are officers of the court, just like attorneys and advocates, collectively referred to as legal practitioners. Professional regulatory bodies' functions are dedicated to the advancement of knowledge and practice of professionals through developing, supporting, regulating, and promoting professional standards for technical and ethical competence. A professional regulatory body is concerned with public benefit as well as the reputation of the profession. Moreover, the objects of the board are to maintain the esteem, enhance the status, and improve the standard of training and functions performed by sheriffs. Develop and implement appropriate measures for purposes of issuing fertility fund certificates to sheriffs who have the potential to establish and operate an office of a sheriff successfully. And lastly, to develop guidelines for the appointment of deputy sheriffs. These objectives are succinctly stated in Section 8 of the Sheriffs Act. As we all know, the power to appoint sheriffs is bestowed to the minister in terms of the Act, which currently the power to appoint deputy acting sheriffs is delegated to the Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, whilst the Minister retains his power to appoint the board and permanent sheriffs. The board is only involved in the appointments process to a limited extent, and that would relate to the issuing of a fertility fund after it is satisfied that the sheriff meets the requirements stipulated in sections 30 to 34 of the Sheriffs Act. 33 is more comprehensive on the various requirements that the board must take into account when assessing whether a sheriff is eligible to be issued with a fertility fund certificate. Lest we not be confused, it is the department or the ministry, rather, that appoints sheriffs and not the South African Board for Sheriffs. The criteria applied by the minister in selecting which person he would want to appoint as an acting or a permanent sheriff is one which is solely known by him whilst doing the selection criteria. So, in all fairness, I'm not going to speculate on what the selection criteria is, that the Deputy Minister applies when he determines which persons are eligible for appointment as acting sheriffs, or the Minister in the event that he determines which persons he wants to appoint as permanent sheriffs. What I can comment on from the board side is the criteria that we apply in determining whether a person or permanent or retired sheriff is eligible for being issued with a Fidelity Fund certificate. With that being said, it is very important that I reaffirm the board's decision not to issue Fidelity Fund certificates to retired sheriffs for the simple reason that they pose a direct and substantial risk to the Fidelity Fund. This was one of the factors that were given to us in the risk assessment that was done by potential insurers when the board sought to insure its Fidelity Fund in terms of the obligation bestowed in Section 29 of the Act. As a result, the board appreciates the fiduciary duty it has towards the Fidelity Fund to protect it at all lengths. The board cannot be held at ransom by any sheriff to be issued with a Fidelity Fund certificate. The assessment for eligibility is one that is objective, neutral, and independent of any person's personal views about the particular person to be considered. Obviously, one statement that I've reiterated, even in the SANAP's AGM that I attended earlier in the year, was that I would implore the department or the minister to consider that when appointments of sheriffs are made, appointments must be based on merit, nothing more. It should not be because of political affiliation, as it has been alleged in the past, or whom that particular person holds or intends to hold membership, which organization that particular person intends to hold membership of when they become a sheriff, whether it is SASS or SANAPS. That should be a thing of the past. In my view, it has been far, far, far too long that this profession, or the regulatory body rather, has been cut in half by the various affiliations to the various voluntary associations that exist. That should not be the case. Voluntary associations should be there to better and promote the image of the profession, in addition to promoting the interests of the members that it represents. As I've said previously, complaints are not determinative of whether a person contemplated for appointment will be given a Fidelity Fund certificate or not. The criteria applied by the board is clearly stated in Section 33 of the Act. Furthermore, complaints, if of a serious nature, are pending before a sheriff or disciplinary action. That information will be communicated to the ministry prior to the appointment being made. That is still within the consultations process between the board and the ministry. However, in instances where a sheriff has retired and is still considered for acting, The information that we will give to the ministry when asked prior to the appointment or in consultation would be the truthful information that is contained in our records. The information that would normally provide to the ministry would be the income as declared by the sheriff in any particular financial year or period, with the proviso that these are not accurate figures, as we are aware that there are a number of sheriffs that are under-declaring their net turnovers or gross turnovers. Also, the information that we provide is the status or the number of complaints pending against that particular sheriff and or disciplinary proceedings underway of that particular sheriff. And lastly, we would then advise the ministry whether the board will be in a position to issue the contemplated sheriff with a fertility fund certificate. No acting or retired sheriff is entitled to an appointment by the minister. That is the discretion of the minister and falls solely within the purview of his power. Further, the narrative that has been going around within the profession that the board is pivotal to the appointments process or is substantially invested in the appointments process has no truth to it. The board's role, as I've stated earlier, is limited to that of stipulating or stating rather whether it will be in a position to provide the person to be appointed with a fertility fund certificate. The board is most grateful to the previous board for the work that started in respect of introducing the new audit guidelines. As I've stated earlier, we are only 9 months into our term, and unfortunately, we are still in the process of engaging and understanding these new audit guidelines. Last month, we met with the acting CEO and his senior team representing IRBA. We discussed the guidelines that were issued and initiated by the previous board. And these discussions are still ongoing, and we intend to complete them in line with our modernization project currently underway. On the issue of complaints regarding our internal complaints department or the manner in which complaints are handled by our complaints department, in particular the lack of skills and knowledge by staff of the board, the question was posed as to whether there was any way that SASS could assist the board in providing training to staff of the board on sheriff's processes. Well, the simple answer to this question is we are a regulatory authority. And although gratefully SASS wants to tender its services to train our staff officials, that would not be the most ethical stance to take. I say so because as a regulatory authority, we have to be free from any interference by voluntary associations. We have to be independent, impartial, and objective when it comes to sheriff's disciplinary matters. Now, the question is, how would a staff member be able to prosecute a complaint or investigate a complaint against a sheriff if the same sheriff was the one that trained them in doing the work? That, for me, is a bit superfluous and illogical. However, the concern has been noted, and the board is in the process of sending those colleagues in the legal and complaints department whom we've inherited from the previous board or from our predecessors for appropriate training in the various institutions of higher learning which provide same. But one thing I can stress and emphasize is that they are well competent to fulfill the functions that they were appointed for, as these were, I emphasize once again, inherited from our predecessors, some of whom sit in this very room tonight, like the current president, Ms. Petro Ruet, who's had the pleasure of serving the board in 3 consecutive terms, Mr. Taka Seboka as well, and Mr. Alan Murigan, to name a few, who were under the board that was ably led by my predecessor, Ms. Charmaine Mabuza. So, fixing the legal department in terms of complaints handling and disciplinary handling processes is work in progress. What I can only say is that I will work from the foundation that was laid by my predecessors going forward to better the mechanisms and procedures we have in place in that unit. The question posed to me about training for the past 2 years could probably be better answered by Ms. Ruet once again and Mr. Murigan, who served on the board until I was appointed in June last year, 2021. We all know that since the start of the COVID pandemic in March 2020, and thereafter, the previous board decided to host a range of virtual masterclasses to replace the needs-based training courses that were held physically in the past. In 2021, these virtual sessions included engagements with the CCMA and the bargaining councils. And due to the several challenges that members of the National Bargaining Council and the sheriffs were experiencing concerning the services delivered by sheriffs to bargaining councils, the South African Board for Sheriffs and the National Bargaining Council arranged a Zoom workshop with the aim for the council to get a deeper understanding and knowledge of the sheriff's profession and the role of the South African Board for Sheriffs. The 2 associations, voluntary associations, SASS and SANAPS, court services from the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, and certain members representing the Small Claims Court were invited to present. The workshop also addressed various questions and concerns tabled by the National Bargaining Councils and sheriffs. The South African Board for Sheriffs engaged the CCMA in respect of the concerns raised by sheriffs, and an information sharing workshop was then organized to discuss the processes and issues handled by sheriffs when carrying out CCMA instructions. Presentations by CCMA, which included input from SANAPS and SASS, were moderated by board members. I know one to have been Mr. Murigan, who spearheaded this task on behalf of the previous board. The workshop was characterized by valuable contributions by all parties, critical questioning, and challenges posed by the 103 attendees that were present on the day. During 2019 and 2020, the Training and Communications Divisions conducted 2 sheriff's introductory course programs. The first intake consisted of 8 newly appointed sheriffs, and the second intake had 103 learners. In 2021, the board again offered the profession an opportunity to participate in the sheriff's introductory course, and 41 learners were registered in this course. The verification of this current intake should be completed by SASS by the end of this month. As with most of our training initiatives, the compulsory bookkeeping course for sheriffs has been postponed more than once to accommodate the ever-changing national lockdown regulations. Options such as the provision of an e-course were considered, though due to the complexity of these concepts in accounting, a face-to-face learning option is still preferred. The developed material was reviewed and presented to the training committee, and its applicability was assessed by industry experts to ensure that it speaks to the sheriff's profession. The development of the bookkeeping course for the sheriffs has been finalized, and a rollout plan has been planned for 2022 to 2023 financial year. The induction to bookkeeping for sheriffs will be a precursor to the implementation of the compulsory bookkeeping course to be implemented. This session is scheduled to be presented to sheriffs on 1 April 2022. It was agreed to provide sheriffs with additional support to understand the changes in the amendment of rules regulating the conduct of proceedings of Magistrates' Courts of South Africa. This support will be in the form of a virtual training session to be done on the 25th of March 2022. Another question was posed as to whether does the board have any intentions of assisting smaller sheriffs in overcoming the financial crisis that they went through due to COVID. The board has in the past given some form of relief to sheriffs whilst we were undergoing the hard times of COVID-19 when no financial assistance was given to most sheriffs. This financial assistance was not only opened to smaller sheriffs or sheriffs with smaller offices and located in rural areas, but was given to the profession as a whole. One thing I can say is that there were sheriffs, some of which operate big offices, who were willing and who actually did waive the financial assistance that was given by the board in order to save the board the money that it lost through this process. Unfortunately, we are one organization that does not have big pockets of money invested to dip into in such times. We as an organization are also facing challenges of financial viability. Therefore, it is at this point in time difficult for us to offer or to continue offering the financial assistance we have in the past, given the strategy objectives that we still yet to meet in our 3-year, or that we've set for ourselves in our 3-year strat plan. I was also asked the questions, are there plans in place, if any, to strengthen the relationship between sheriffs and the South African Board for Sheriffs? And the answer to the simple question is that I've learned that even in this new board's tenure, these relations were strained. And I do call upon sheriffs, I'd like to call upon sheriffs, especially veteran sheriffs, who were once in my position, to assist with advising as to how this would be done. We are looking into this matter. We are looking into how we can improve relations. But, as I've said it to colleagues, the day where the board will find itself in a position where most sheriffs like it or actively promote it, is the day where the board would have turned into a union or voluntary association for sheriffs. The board is not there to solely advance sheriffs' interests and look for ways as to how to better their income. That is for individual sheriffs as businessmen and women running their own practices, together with their associations, to explore. Our role, or the role of the board, is that of regulating where the sheriffs are giving a service that is befitting and adequate to the standards set out in the Code of Conduct and the service charter that they have undertook to abide by. Without further ado, I must, in conclusion, thank all those sheriffs that have supported the board or who have shown their willingness across board from either association to support the board in the work that it does, which is to regulate the profession. There are many sheriffs, some of whom sit amongst you, who have shown great effort to want to curb the corruption that is currently alleged to happen within the sheriff's profession. I must emphasize that the board takes no preferent view towards a particular voluntary association. The board's role is that to be neutral to both, to listen to both, and not align itself politically to either, because the board has a very important and crucial role to play in this constitutional democracy. In fact, it is one of the organizations put or established to enhance constitutional democracy. Therefore, the board has to protect the public and the professionals who are consumers of sheriff's services. For example, the attorney's profession and members of the public who approach sheriff's offices directly without the assistance of an attorney. I must also make mention that since I've taken office, it is alarming, or the number of complaints that I receive or the board receives on the service that is given by sheriffs, on the disservice that is given by sheriffs, is alarming and concerning. The number of sheriffs that are practicing or doing other remunerative work without ministerial approval in terms of Section 53 of the Act is alarming. And one thing is that the board will do what it has to do, which is to bring those who are acting in non-compliance of the Act to book in order to ensure that we have a clean profession and a profession with great esteem. Lastly, I'd like to thank the outgoing leadership of SASS for the contribution that they have made in the profession and congratulate the newly elected leadership of SASS who will take over the reins. I invite you to step forward, make or arrange a meeting as soon as possible early into your election in order for us to discuss all the matters of mutual concern that may affect sheriffs and which the board may ably assist in remedy. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, thank you very much for affording me this opportunity to address this august task. I wish you well in all your endeavors. I thank you.